title fell from her lips, I realized those were the words I didn't have for the counselor. That's what had happened to me. So I read the book, and I went to my church, and I actually let them pray for me. It was painful and scary, but I let them do it in private. I went to a workshop where I worked through how it was that I viewed God. And when it was all over, I felt like I could do what's the title of my book, which I'll move forward. Walking with tension. I felt like I could physically walk with the tension of my disability, but I also felt for the first time in my life, I could walk with the tension of knowing that God is the healer, and I'm going to live with cerebral palsy for the rest of my life. So if you'd like to read that story more in detail, I have the book on sale today. It's $10. I'll be out there afterwards. And you can also get it on your Kindle for $5 on Amazon, if that would be of interest to you. I also know that your theme this week is Be the Bridge. And I've been engaged in the past week thinking about how we might be the bridge to reach out to people with disabilities. Because I hope that we can change our relationships so they look less like this and more like this. How do we do that? So I have 3 points that I want to share with you today that might help to answer that question. And the first one is, I think as we reach out to people with disabilities, we have to dare to see the whole picture. There have been adults in professional contexts who have said to me, in regards to my disability, I just don't see you that way. And they're being polite. They're saying, I don't see you as incompetent, unintelligent, incapable of doing your job because of your disability. And I think, good, I don't want you to think those things about me. But I don't know that approach, I just don't see you that way, is the best approach. Because I think about when I started to blog about what it is to have a disability, and a few people started reading it. And one day, we had freezing rain, and I pulled my car into the parking lot, and I got out, and I turned around, and 2 of my colleagues were standing there, ready to death grip me into the door so I didn't slip and fall in the ice. Those are people who are willing to see me that way. I think about my friend Katrina, who now puts a chair like this in her entryway so that when I go and visit her, I have a place to sit down and take off and put on my shoes, because it's awkward for me to do that standing up. I think about my colleague Tim, who has read part of Walking with Tension and realized that I have a startle reflex. I jump a mile and it doesn't take too much. And so if my back's turned and he comes into the media center, he just gently announces that he's coming so I don't. And I appreciate that. Those are people who have dared to see me that way. But I don't think it should stop there. I think we need to see the whole picture. Because in addition to you helping me out of my car and setting out a chair for me and making sure I don't startle, I want you to know that I am an auntie and I love my 2 nieces and nephews. They are the joy of my life. I want you to know that I love academics. I love it. I love study. I love how you can study for hour after hour and you can learn things and you can chew on it and you can get smarter. But even in that moment, you realize that God is ultimately smarter and more knowledgeable and more wise than you, and that makes me want to worship him. And I hope you have a moment like that in your college career, because it is beautiful. I love food. I was very glad when they invited me to lunch. I will try to keep my mouth closed, but I love it. I love coffee. I think drinking coffee or not drinking coffee in the morning is like choosing not to take a shower. It's wrong. It's wrong. And I love worship. I love worship. I love just going to church and pouring it out. And people stare at me and I don't care. I just love it. Minnesota author Jonathan Friesen was born with Tourette's and epilepsy, and he says this: we are all asking these 2 questions. Do you see me, and do you like what you see? I believe we are all asking those 2 questions. But I think when you have a physical disability, the answer to those questions might be, yeah, I know you see me, but I'm not quite sure that you like what you see. Thank you. And I think about the times that I've been stared at in public because of the way I walk. I remember this time I was at Caribou Coffee, and I was getting out of my car, and I was a few minutes early, and there was a man at the door, and at first I thought he was checking me out. And I thought, I do look fine today. Got my skinny jeans on, and my boots, my cute little hat, and thank you very much. But I got closer to him, and I realized he was looking at me, but not with pleasure. He was not checking me out. He was looking at the way I walked, and what I saw in his eyes was not pleasure. It was disappointment. Being stared at is like being stared through. Only the shell of who you are is seen, but your whole soul is missed. And you can know that God loves you. You can have family and friends who love you, but in that moment, you start to ask questions. You start to wonder if you really have anything of value to offer the world. Maybe you should stay home. Maybe you should stay single. It's a cutting and evaluative experience that stays with you for a long time. And as painful as it is, those experiences have taught me these two things that I want to pass on to you this morning. How we see each other matters. It matters. And we all have a role to play. So let's dare to love each other with our eyes and to see the whole picture. The woman on this screen I found because I Googled smiling eyes, and this is what came up. And I thought of this verse. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body is going to be full of light. I think as we focus on Jesus, who is the light of the world, who does see, we can be filled with that light and we can see each other like this woman, and it is game-changing. The next way I think that we can reach out to people with disabilities is through friendship. I think sometimes friendship is mentioned often, and we might think it's a simple thing, but I actually think authentic friendship with somebody who has a disability can be one of the most profound and beautiful things you'll ever do with your life. I'll also tell you this. I have family and friends who love me. Some of them are actually here today. But I am lonely. I'm more lonely than I'd like to be. And I think that that does have to do with physical difference, but I also think that there is a social, psychological, emotional shift that happens in a person's life when they have a disability. Part of your life is very much behind your typical peers, and part of it is sped up, and I want to give you some examples of that. So, for example, I have no idea what it is to enjoy movement in my body or to be part of a sports team, or to join with friends to practice every day so you can work as a team to accomplish a win. But as I watch professional football, not knowing what's going on, and I see people, they get so excited. I mean, it reminds me of worship at church. And talking to people who have now turned around and they're now coaching, I realize that's a huge, dear part of their life, and I have no idea what that is. In a more personal level, I have never had a boyfriend. I've never dated, had a significant other. I've certainly never born or raised children. But I just turned 30, and more, I'm watching my peers go through that. When I was 25, I got a letter from a fertility clinic asking if I was in need of their services. And when I was 27, people who were close to me, quite close, just not out of condemnation, but observation, just said to me, I was done having children when I was your age. And I just didn't know what to say. And neither did they, because there was a hallway between us of experience. And on the other end, if you put me in a room with a 55-year-old, I think we can talk a blue streak. We want to talk about orthotic shoes, aches and pains, what your body's not doing that it used to do, why you're terrified of ice and snow, and what that's doing to your soul. Both in the wisdom that that's providing, because every day you're now being asked to live in a body that's different than it used to be. And what makes that hard and what makes that easy, I could do it. But my actual peers, those are the hardest to relate to. Jean Vanier is a man who spent most of his life devoted to building communities for people with intellectual disabilities, adults who had severe disability. And he had this to say: our society is geared to growth, development, progress. Life for most of us is a race to be won. Families are about evolution. At a certain age, children are encouraged to leave home, get married, have children of their own, and move on with their lives. But people with disabilities, and I want to add some people with disabilities in some circumstances, have no such future. Once they've reached a certain level of development, they are no longer expected or encouraged to progress. There's no promotion for the disabled, and what forward movement there is seems frequently to be either erratic or cruelly sped up. Many move quite quickly from childhood to adulthood without passing through a period of adolescence. Others age quickly. Our society is not set up to cope very well with people who are weaker or slower. And more important, we're not skilled at listening to the wisdom of those whose life patterns are outside the social norm. I share that with you today because if you've ever experienced that it's hard to relate to someone who has a disability, I just want to affirm that that's a real dynamic. That's actually happening. How many of you have had that experience? Either you're conversing with somebody with a disability and it seems like just hard to do, or you have a disability and you just can't relate. Anybody experience that? Yeah. Part of that, I think, is because of this shift. But I wanted to encourage you with this. As I look back over my life, my undergraduate career in particular, I think was really a beautiful 4-year window of time where I felt like my erratic timeline and my typical peers' timeline actually intersected. Because I was in a community where most people were single, they had just finished high school, and we all had that shared experience of pursuing academics together. So I think, at least while you're here at Northwestern, you can share that with each other. But I also think, as a topic of conversation, you can talk about God all the time. Because God is everlasting, and I think he fits into our lives no matter where we are on the timeline. That brings us to this picture. When we think about people with disabilities in the Bible, I think what I automatically go to is Jesus healing people in the New Testament. How many of you think of those stories? And they're great stories. I wondered, though, is there a story of somebody who's not Jesus who doesn't approach somebody with miraculous healing? And there is. And the reason I'm curious about that is so often I think our human interactions are like that. We're not approaching people with miraculous healing, we're approaching them with ourselves. And so there is this story of Mephibosheth.